Major themes in the Book of Daniel. The Book of Daniel presents a unified theological message that speaks to God's rule over history, the call to faithful obedience, and the certainty of God's ultimate victory. Written in a context of exile and foreign domination, Daniel addresses the question of how God's people are to live when political power belongs to those who do not acknowledge Him. Through narrative and prophecy, the book affirms that earthly empires rise and fall under divine authority, while God's kingdom alone endures forever. A central theme in Daniel is the absolute sovereignty of God. From the opening chapter to the final vision, God is portrayed as the one who controls events, appoints rulers, and determines the course of history. Kings such as Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar learn that their authority is neither self-derived nor permanent. God changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. Daniel 2 verse 21. Even the most powerful rulers are subject to divine judgment when they exalt themselves. History, according to Daniel, is not driven by chance or human ambition, but by the purposeful will of God. Closely connected to God's sovereignty is the call to faithfulness in a hostile environment. Daniel and his companions live under constant pressure to conform to the values and practices of Babylonian society. Yet they consistently choose loyalty to God over personal safety or advancement. Daniel's refusal to defile himself with the king's food, the three young men's refusal to bow to the golden image, and Daniel's continued practice of prayer despite legal threats all demonstrate steadfast devotion. These accounts show that faithfulness is not contingent upon comfort or success, but upon unwavering trust in God. The book also highlights God's power to deliver those who remain faithful. The dramatic rescues from the fiery furnace and the lion's den testify that God is able to intervene supernaturally on behalf of His servants. At the same time, the text makes clear that obedience is not a guarantee of immediate deliverance. The three men before the furnace declare that God is able to save them, but affirm that even if He does not, they will not worship false gods. Daniel 3 verses 17 to 18. Faith, therefore, is grounded in God's character rather than in expected outcomes. Daniel strongly emphasizes the danger of human pride and the certainty of divine judgment. Nebuchadnezzar's humiliation and Belshazzar's sudden downfall reveal that arrogance before God leads to ruin. When rulers exalt themselves, misuse their authority, or desecrate what belongs to God, judgment follows. The recurring message is that God alone deserves glory, and those who refuse to acknowledge Him will eventually be brought low. Running through both the narratives and visions is the assurance that God's kingdom will ultimately triumph over all human rule. Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and his later visions describe a succession of empires that dominate the world for a time but eventually collapse. In contrast, God's kingdom is portrayed as everlasting and indestructible. The vision of the Son of Man receiving dominion and glory presents a ruler whose authority will never pass away. Daniel 7 verses 13 to 14. This kingdom is not merely political but divine, established by God and extending beyond history into eternity. The prophetic sections of Daniel offer hope to those who suffer under oppression. The visions acknowledge the reality of persecution, conflict, and injustice, yet they also affirm that evil has limits set by God. Though troubling events are permitted for a time, God remains in control, and His purposes will stand. These revelations are intended to strengthen the faithful, assuring them that endurance is not in vain and that God's justice will prevail. Finally, Daniel points forward to resurrection and final judgment. One of the clearest statements in the Old Testament concerning life after death appears in the closing chapter, where many who sleep in the dust are said to awake, some to everlasting life and others to shame and contempt. Daniel 12 verse 2. This promise anchors hope beyond present suffering and affirms that God's justice extends beyond this life. Taken as a whole, the book of Daniel proclaims that God reigns supreme over history, calls His people to faithful obedience in the midst of opposition, and guarantees the ultimate victory of His kingdom. It encourages trust in God's wisdom, humility before His authority, and perseverance in hope, even when the world appears to be ruled by powers hostile to Him.